The end of life is an unknown process for those who encounter it. But for those who stay and suffer loss, any kind of loss, we may find grief or not.
It is interesting because there's a lot of debate whether grief is a human thing or if other animals can also experience grief. It is also so human that it is one of the things we use to mark the start of humanity. So, I think this is as usual, a pretty deep topic that hopefully we'll try to make it a bit more human, bring it out to your everyday experience and to what grief is like for most people. So with that in mind, let's confront your troubles.
Make conscious the unconscious.
Hi, this is Josh.
And this is Santi. Welcome to this session in the Mind Quest.
So we are going to do kind of an overview of grief. Similar to the topic from last week, this is one of those concepts that has been with humanity for most of humanity. So while nowadays in psychology we can talk about grief and we have this language to understand what grief is like, it's important to remember that there have always been methods of handling grief. The first humans felt grief when the first dead human died. So, and the first humans had to figure out a way to process that grief. So while grief is very much a topic of psychology, also it's very much a topic of humanity and a topic of what makes us human. So that's kind of the idea for today.
So, well, yes. I think the idea of exploring grief is at the beginning just get to this idea of what is emotional attachment process and what are these stages of grief and sometimes what is acceptance and adjustment to the outcome.
Yes, and when we talk about what to do about grief, we will often use this term like making meaning or re-symbolizing, accepting, transforming, moving on. All of these things are ways to say that we have to do something with that grief. While it is true that time does help heal, it is a little bit like a physical wound. If you're lucky, time will take care of it. It's usually recommended to take some care of it yourself, right? Like maybe disinfect the wound, bandage it. The same way with grief. Well, yeah, you may just go through it without many issues. Also important to remember that there are things you can do to sort of help that process move along in a healthy way.
Well, we'll also be looking at this understand validation and acceptance of grief, as you were saying, right? And what is the this meaning and coexistence of pain and purpose? Because I think so many times when we are in loss, when we suffer loss, we're in this need of finding out well what's about to come, what's coming next. And I think that context now is helping us somehow. Many of us in around the world are in a moment of remembrance and going back to the dates. So let's get also around this subjective life experience of mourning and trauma informed empathy.
I think the
Oh, wait. There's something else. We're looking also at some empirical actual research that is coming on. So, what is actually nowadays psychology saying about the situation and what is this cross-cultural psychological and clinical approaches? Because in time we'll find out that for some reason we decided that mourning was not okay with us, and now we're rediscovering why that was a mistake.
yeah, this is very true. Oh, sorry. Oh, so I want to say that yeah, this is very interesting because I think as we have had these talks the last few weeks, something that has sort of become a pattern is that a lot of these things or these ways of understanding the mind and helping the mind heal were present in the past through history with different language, in different cultural contexts. And in many ways, what psychology is doing now is taking those ideas and sort of rephrasing them in the language of modern psychology. But we have to remember, like, there is a cultural context to those tools from the past, right? We have talked about meditation and how if meditation is abstracted from its cultural context, be it spiritual, purely cultural, social, it stops being like a way of actually healing and it becomes just a patch, just a band-aid so you can be, you can live with your anxiety enough to go to work the next day, which is, well, matters to your boss. So we're going to see how culture and how important culture is in terms of handling grief and dealing with these very intense human emotions and experiences. And the idea is that, how we usually do, we can try to sort of link this to a real life story. So maybe with that, we can begin today's session. And Santi, you can start with whatever is on your mind today.
Well, this is kind of a hard past topic for me, but still with me all the time.
Mm-mm.
No, you may know back in the history, in our history, because we've talked about this several times before, but nowadays coming up out, I think somehow. So first time I heard about grief management somehow was for better or worse on a Simpsons episode.
Okay.
And I remember this where Lisa and Bart go through these 5 stages of denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance, each in their own timing, of course. And showing how we all process grief differently, but often through the same steps. I don't know how much time passed since the first time I saw that episode until I experienced some real grief when I lost something or someone that mattered. Maybe that's strange to say, but as a kid, we might enjoy a dessert uh, as a dessert design, or something that you like how it looks, right? And it's hard for you to actually eat it because it looks, I don't know, funny or it's nice to see and you want to keep it. Uh, but there's no real grief there. But I do remember when I was a child that my parents helped me raise chicken. So there were two chicken at my home. One was my brother's, one was mine. We were just two at that time. And someday, for no particular reason, we were at some aunt's house and we ate chicken that day, and our chicken were no more. So we get past the stage to chicken was nice and delicious to okay, just ate my chicken. And of course, we cried as kids, and you suffered the loss of our chicken because we loved them so much. They were very appreciated pets for us. So that was the first time I think I do experience grief. So what I want to know is what happened because it still is food, and until I didn't know it was my chicken that I ate, everything was okay. What happened there?
So, okay, so this is, I think, it's going to be a basis concept for today, and it's one of my favorite concepts in psychoanalysis. The word is cathexis, but it is much simpler than it sounds. So, there are things in the world, like you were saying, that we like. Like, it can be food, it can be an object, it can be an animal, it can be another person. And the question is, why that one chicken? If there are billions of other chickens in the world, why do I care about that one chicken? and probably you will be for probably I say this, that Freud also had this question. Like, why do we like the things we like? And he comes up with this description that I usually think the easiest way to understand it is through, I think I mentioned this in the book as well. In Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince, there is this chapter with the fox where the little prince, or rather the fox, is explaining to the little prince that right there and then, when they just met, he is just a fox and he is just another human. But if they start talking to each other and they start seeing each other there every day, he will become tame. And the moment he becomes tame, to the kid, that fox becomes the only one in the whole universe that is like that. And to that fox, that kid becomes the only human that is like that. So this process of sort of turning a wild object into my wild object, into my whatever it is, into my pet rock. It doesn't even have to be a living thing. That process is called catexis. It is the process of investing your, probably would say, psychic energy. But it's not a metaphysical concept. It is just caring about things. So whenever I say investing meaning, what I'm saying is you start caring about something. So as you spend more time with it, as you have more experiences with it, as you sort of experience life with this thing in your life, it becomes special. It becomes connected with psychic energy, with meaning, with feelings, with ideas. And this is how everything happens. This is how we sort of imbue everything with meaning. So memories, we imbue with meaning like this. People, we imbue with meaning like this. Objects, and so on and so forth. But this process is also the source of grief. Because then, when that object is lost, and it will be lost at some point because we live in a material world of physicality and limited timeline, that energy, that process of these psychic energy, these meanings, these feelings, being withdrawn from the object that is now lost, that is what Freud will describe as grief. The literal experience of an object that we care about being disinvested with our feelings, from our emotions, from our memories, because the object is gone. So that feeling, that pain of change, of reorganization, that is, again, remember, there's only brain, right? So we're talking about neurons literally reconnecting each other. That is the experience that we call grief. The process of having to let that object go and redirect the meaning, the ideas we had from that object to something else. So if this was my favorite lucky jacket that I wear every time I go to the casino, and I lost it, I have to make something with now that empty space of my lucky jacket. How am I going to go to the casino now that I don't have my lucky jacket? So, grief, trauma, probably not trauma, but grief. Okay, now I have lucky boots. I have disinvested my old jacket. I still like it, I remember it. It was very, very meaningful for me. But now this role has been given to something else. Does this sound like what happened to the chicken? Or with the chicken?
Sure. Actually, I do think it happened later on. We got a pet dog.
Mm.
Fortunately, we didn't eat it
Mm-mm.
and lived quite long, but I think that's how it was replaced in time. I don't have to remember that because I was quite little, about
Mm.
4 to 5 maybe.
Mm. You are also pointing
So
something important about memory. Memory is stronger when linked to emotion. And it has a bias to become even stronger when linked to negative emotion. Because obviously that helps you survive back in the day.
it's learning, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, as we grow older,
Mhm.
those and that tend to appear more often, at least in your life, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I've lost, well, family and friends, even a wife.
Mm-hmm.
but losing opportunities sometimes kind of hurt more,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Then that losing loved ones because I lost meaning. There were times I didn't know who I was anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to rebuild myself, redefine why and who I was, so life would make some sense again.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of working towards oblivion out of rejection. Uh, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but the thing is, when you love somebody and you get that inside you, but at the same time, when there is a chance to do something and you cower it back,
Mm-hmm.
you're not able to do it. Actually, you carry on with a grief that you could have done something about it and you didn't did it. So it stays longer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to go through that road. So and I know I got a lot of these ones that what would have happened if I chosen this instead of that? Hmm? Starting from my career, an
Mm-hmm.
artist. That's one of those. But I also got those of what would have happened if I had stayed in, I don't know, US. I got a chance, didn't did it. So there, because I know my loved ones, or the people around me that I have lost. Maybe I wasn't really able to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there's this opportunity of things that I let go,
Mm-hmm.
and now I still grieve about it sometimes.
I think you're pointing out another core characteristic of grief, or loss rather, is that loss is inevitable because any choice implies loss. So if I choose to have pancakes for breakfast, I am not having eggs or coffee because I physically cannot fit them in my body. If I choose the career of artist, I have to give up all the other careers that I could have chosen. So I think you are kind of cluing out into this idea that normally, we think of loss and grief as okay, like these big things, like okay, somebody died, we moved away or something like that. But it's important to remember that there is loss, like I said, in every choice that we make. If I choose to go out on a date with one person, I am choosing not to go out on a date with all the other people in the world at the same time. It's important to, for other. So I think that's sort of one element to it. The idea that, yeah, it's actually perfectly logical what you're saying, that there is more love than only this big event, right? That there is loss in your everyday life. There is loss in, even in positive choices, right? Like, even if you were happy, excited about your choice of career, that doesn't mean there wouldn't be like a feeling of oh man, like, but maybe if I became I don't know, like a doctor, things would be different. Like, different, not mutually exclusive, right? Choice always brings love, even if you're happy with your choice, because that's being human. Like, well, we all wish we could have the cake and also eat the cake, but we can't, right? So I think on one hand there is that. I think that you very well sort of point out as well. Like there is more there is this cost of opportunity to things we do that we have to face at some point. Like, I think being aware of it very much is part of being able to heal and work through these things, right? I think one or two episodes ago we were talking about these people that they are, because of insecurity, they will lie about what they truly are, or what they truly do, or things like that. In many ways, grief has these characteristics as well. That sometimes it's easier to pretend there is no grief, to pretend like I am so strong. I am well, no, I don't cry. That's not for me. But that doesn't change the reality. That there was a lot. There is a grieving process. There is a something that needs to be talked about. So I think that's also something that you're kind of cluing in as well, that the way to work through grief is to be open about grief, is to talk to somebody about grief. We've said this last week as well. Like healing itself is healing, right? I think this is a little bit cliche, but I think the end game of this sort of choice idea or choice problem is that this is one of those things that we really cannot do anything about. Just like death, loss is something that humanity cannot do anything about, right? Like even our best efforts, we still give up something. We have built the world of humans where we can talk over the world instantly, but we have eaten the world in the process, right? Like there's always these. I was thinking in alchemy, Thomas Alchemist came to my head. This law of equivalent exchange. When you gain something, you also lose something. So that's kind of this idea here. I think you are also very correct in this idea that as we grow older, more and more death becomes closer and closer, right? Well, again, this is just a natural fact of being mortal beings, and or in the environment, we'll start growing older and dying as we grow older. I think perhaps this is when sort of like I said before, this idea of psychology and what to do to sort of take care of you during a process of grief sort of come into play. So maybe that could be an interesting question. So when these things happen, did you do anything to take care of yourself or to work on your grief as you were going through them?
Well, no, no, not really. The thing is, try to bury your stuff
Mm-hmm.
with the lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least that's how they teach you to
Mm-hmm.
interact with the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And job enforces that
Mm-hmm.
somehow. So you only got 3 days apart for your loss, and sorry, you need to come back. We don't care if you're okay. Yeah, that kind of situation. And
Mm-hmm.
that reminds me of when I became actually a widower,
Mm-hmm.
and I lost my grandfather and my sensei all around the same time. My grandfather was my sensei, so I lost him more or less the same during the same week. I lost my wife,
Mm-hmm.
so I felt like I lost the chance to grieve properly. It because it all happened at once. The wife, the teacher. I lost my home because I was buying a house at the time. Plus, I got into some extra legal debts and issues that I need to solve due to those losses.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I went to therapy, but I think I didn't grieve as expected. Because
Mm-hmm.
you get this idea of how grief is supposed to be, and you get this mourning about. And I don't know, maybe you're not necessarily crying all the time, but like this continuous sadness that is going around with you. Uh, Ironically, I grieved more when I actually lost my cat, Inko, about in a Halloween of 2021. He was poisoned. Uh, but I'm to feeling that is there something behind this idea of what we must, uh, or that idea that we must get better to and move on quickly as possible? Because I'm still unsure if I truly accept it. I mean the loss, right? I'm not sure if I truly accept it, or I just pass through it, like walking over the situation and letting everything just behind, buried, but not solved. I don't know if solved is the right word either.
Mm-hmm. So it's straight and go. Like there is no timeline on grief. Like there is no okay, like a week you stop crying. 2 weeks you stop thinking about that. A month you find a new cat. No. There is no timeline. Okay? Every person, depending on their own life history, depending on their own mental resources, depending on their own environment, will go through grief in different ways. And this is where this idea of culture also comes into play, right? Like what death means to every person often comes from a cultural perspective on death. So if I am from a Catholic country, it's likely that my understanding of death is somehow informed by the Christian Catholic worldview, right? So even if I not necessarily I'm a believer, maybe I will still go to a funeral. Maybe I'm not necessarily a believer, but I will still go to a mass, right? Like so. When we say culture, we refer to all of these aspects, right? So we were talking about yesterday about this like language, ritual ways of doing rituals, customs around death, around birth. Unfortunately, I think again modern Western culture focused on productivity and work, as you well point out, doesn't really care about these things. It cares about you being back in your chair producing money for the company, right? So there's not that you have 3 days, 3 days to get better, or So that is why in that time, like because of capitalism. From the perspective of psychology, there is no time. However, there is something that we do have to point out here, right? It is definitely possible to grieve in a way that makes things worse. It is definitely possible to grieve in a way that rather than over time getting better, you get worse. You feel worse. You feel more isolated. You feel more damaged. You feel more empty. So there is definitely like this this care that one has to have around grief. And if you know somebody that is grieving, right? First of all, swallowing things. No, do not swallow things. Do not just bury them inside until they go away, because they won't go away. Again, going back to what we spoke last time, talking about unconscious, your unconscious purpose is to contain things and keep them contained. So if they go there, they will stay there for as long as you're alive. They don't go away. The problem is that the prison is not perfect. So sometimes things escape. So if grief is not processed, maybe I start more and more getting depressed, not being my emotions, so that I don't feel the one little escape I'm not being down. Again, Freud in Grief and Melancholy, he sort of describes this idea that ideally what happens with grief is, like I said earlier, for you something is lost, there is a moment of sort of pain, that is normal, because something that at the end of the day was you, was lost. And then there is a slow process of redirecting this meaning, this symbol, this emotion. Ideally, that process of feeling better should look like a line that goes up. Right? Like maybe not like to the moon, but through ups and downs, generally trends to go up. That is kind of a healthy enough way to deal with grief. There are still ups and downs, but you're generally feeling better. That's what ideally should happen. So maybe at the beginning, you are in your room, close, crying. Maybe 2 days, you start talking to your immediate family, cry a little bit more. After a week, maybe you start talking to others, cry a bit more, go to the funeral. More interaction, more sort of community support. Again, the reason why grief is cultural is that community support is key to working through these kind of things. Having this opportunity to discuss, to talk about death, because obviously that's what this confronts you with. And what that means to you, to them, to this person, to the priest, to this person that you don't know. To feel sort of supported by this humanity that, yeah, we're all in this together. That is kind of the idea, or kind of the opposite of grief, or sort of the way to heal grief is to feel part of something where you're not the only one. So yes, one of us died, but we're all still here, at least for now. And there will be us, will still be here later, in the next generation. So it's still us. It's just not that particular person, not this particular animal, not this particular whatever, this particular situation. So no, there is definitely nothing in terms of timelines. However, there ideally should be a trend that goes up. That is kind of a good thing to look at. If the trend isn't going up, if it is staying flat or going down, that usually means that something was, like you were saying earlier, like either repressed, followed, put away, it was never dealt with, and that is sort of weighting you down. So it is possible to go up because the weight is still there. It's just sort of still dragging you down. Normally, this is where I would say, yeah, you could just talk to somebody. This is one of the situations where I would suggest professional help. Grief is very complex. And because it is so intertwined with culture, sometimes family or immediate environment not the best to deal with grief. If the family does not know how to deal with grief, the person is also going to find it very difficult to receive help from their family to deal with grief. You cannot help somebody to do something you don't know how to do. So because of this complexity, this is one of those topics where, yeah, generally recommendation is go to a professional. That doesn't have to be a psychologist. It can be a religious worker. It can be a priest. It can be an imam. It can be a rabbi. It can be a counselor. It can be a social worker. It can be a I don't know, pastoral counselor. But somebody who knows about death, if that makes sense, right? Like, so your neighbor probably not the best, like probably the same as your family, right? So somebody whose training involves talking about death. So that's why religious workers usually know how to do it. It's not that it's in the Bible how to talk about death, it's that it's part of their day job. And that's why they know how to do it. So that's what I mean when I say religious workers or professionals who are in this field, who know how to have this conversation, right? A good pastor is not going to try to convert you while talking to you about death. He's going to try to genuinely help you feel better. And that's kind of the idea there as well. If that is not possible, self-help books. Okay, I mean, if you have to, I mean, there is no social way of finding support. Reading does help. I would suggest don't go for self-help books. Find a book where the narrative has to do with what you are going through. So if you are going through the death of a loved one, find a book that you regularly want to read where the narrative is about somebody who loses somebody they love. Again, the idea is to establish this connection. We talked about yesterday as well, last week. This connection across time. It doesn't have to be a living person next to you. Because humanity has dealt with that through thousands and thousands of years. So there has to be someone in the past who felt the way you felt. So that's another option, right? Like if I cannot find social support, reading narratives, we talked about myths as well last week, we talked about archetypes as well, that is another option. Like try to find meaning, try to find understanding through those. If that is also not possible, and the third option that you could try to do on your own is a ritual. This works because it is very personal, so as long as you're really putting yourself into it, it can't really go wrong. The problem is that not everybody can put themselves fully into doing a ritual. Because if you are burying a letter, you may feel ridiculous while you're doing it, and this is a lot of time. Okay, now you're out of the ritual, it becomes harder. But the third option is, well, I said a ritual, but I mean ritualization in general. So again, there's a reason why religions have funerals or a funeral equivalent or something to do where people die. It's because the same way that language is a healing tool for our mind, rituals are also a healing tool for our mind. Usually, rituals are the communal way of healing, the same way that talking is the individual way. All humans do rituals, but they don't have to be religious. So if somebody puts on a t-shirt every time their favorite hockey team plays, that is a ritual. What it's doing, I don't know, but it's doing something. If somebody has the family wash their hands and pray before eating, that is a ritual. If every day before going to work I smoke a joint, that is a ritual. So as humans, we do rituals because they help us organize the world, they help us feel safe, they help us create these spaces of thinking about ourselves. So when I'm smoking a joint, I am thinking about how I hate this job, I should do something else. So I'm having this psychological experience. Even if it looks like I'm smoking a joint. So this is why rituals work. For the third option, then in when grief is or trying to deal with grief, is trying to ritualize it. So, like I said before, the therapeutic ritual would be either write a letter and then burn it, write a letter and bury it, write a letter and put it in a helium balloon and send it away in a bubble out on the sea. So send this letter somehow to the other world. Again, journaling is a ritual as well, so it is something that a therapist may also suggest. And obviously personal rituals, like maybe I decide that I want to make a song about somebody that passed away. Maybe I decide that I want to make a painting, do a drawing, do a graffiti downtown of somebody that passed away. So those symbols, those expressions are also rituals as well. I'm doing this ritual that means, okay, I'm done with this. I painted their face on a building downtown. This is how I remember them. This is my goodbye to them. I can move on. So that's the idea behind rituals. And they become tools of our life because of I'm sure you, like we said before, like grief is something that stays there through our life. It is something. These are tools that you will bring up over and over again as we grow older, because there will be a lot of loss. That is just part of being human. And I'm going that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I was remembering stuff. No, when I lost my wife, I actually did a painting on her,
Mm.
but I didn't keep it. I burned it.
Mm. Mm.
I burned it. So a way, I don't know, to forgive and let go,
Mm.
something like that.
Exact.
But
Exact. That's very true.
and, you know, I'm sure eventually I'll have to grieve again,
Mm.
right? Because that's life. You are too. And you're going to lose,
Mm-hmm.
get into losing something,
Mm-hmm.
someone. Even though and I especially, I tend to think that it won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when I left my last job, even though it was my decision, I still feel this anguish of emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll happen again, like with family and friends. So how can we like prepare for ourselves for this
Mm-hmm.
objectively? Is there, because there should be a way. If you get like a solution afterward,
Mm-hmm.
how can anyone really prepare for loss with with what we know today?
Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, I think we talked about how inevitable loss is. In many ways, preparing for it, on one hand, have to do a lot with self-care, with you finding yourself in a situation where you will have the mental resources, the social resources to go through a grieving process that is healthy, right? Like we spoke about how if you have nobody to talk to, it's going to be challenging to have that grieving process where you talk to somebody about that. If you are working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, it's going to be very challenging to have the space to do a painting and burn, right? Like there is this, the same way ideally you don't want to be on your last dollar every day of the month, the same way you don't want to be on your last limb in terms of your mental health, right? So that's kind of the first step. because there will always be loss. You can be for sure that in the future, at some point, there is going to be a downturn in your experience of the world. So if you're always at the edge of having a breakdown, you are essentially guaranteeing that next time you lose something, you are going to have a breakdown, right? So that is kind of the first basics is try to take care of yourself in a way that you can sort of absorb the pain of a loss. That you know that okay, if something were to happen tomorrow, I know who to call and cry with. If something were to happen tomorrow, I can call somebody, a friend, and go out for drinks. If something were to happen tomorrow, I have this book that I've been wanting to read, and I can just lock myself in the room to read and have some hot coffee or something. So on one side, there is this very practical aspect to it of trying to get yourself to a place where you can take stress, you can take loss without decompensating too much. Second element is having an awareness or a level of self-awareness or self-knowledge of knowing how you, in the past, have handled grief. And again, this is kind of a handle your heart kind of evaluation. Was it healthy or was it not? And then trying to, okay, last time I went into a cocaine binge and I spent a week sleeping in a ditch. So maybe that wasn't the best way to deal with my grief. So this time, maybe not go into cocaine. Have a plan instead, right? Have a drink instead. Okay, well, sure. So again, second idea would be look at the past and try to prepare for that happening again. Oh, but that was 10 years ago. I feel so much better. Assume it's going to happen anyways. Prepare just in case. And I think the third way is again, keep in mind that this is not something that is meant to be handled individually. As much as we live in a hyper individualist society when everything you do is your fault and everything that's wrong with the world is also your fault, grief is something that no human is expected to deal with alone. Because it confronts us with a reality that it is beyond all humans, which is death. So there is a reason, like I said before, why grief always appears in cultural context. Because you need to talk to somebody about it. You need to talk not only about the specific loss, but about death. At some point, if you think of a funeral, at some point this conversation will come up. Ideally, about death, about what we think of death, and the ones that remain think of death. You know. Yeah, and like I said, if you have access to mental health services as well, grief is one of those where why wouldn't you go to therapy, right? Like, it is really going to therapy or going to professional health services not only helps you go through it healthy, it gives you the opportunity to build or grow further and take this opportunity and turn it into growth. So that's why for that I would also suggest always consider just talking to a therapist or a counselor who is really there to talk about grief and not to get your money and give you a diagnosis. That would be the recommendation there. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we mentioned something about this, but I do want to express it here because it was like a cultural shock for me. Some point when I moved from the Sierra to down to the coast, and that gets me to wonder if grief is actually lived in the same way everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Or there are really connections, links in the way we actually live with grief.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in the up in Northern Americas, and I'm quite in the middle. Uh, but there are evident differences on the way we grieve. And this shock I got, I was like 2 weeks living down here, and all of a sudden there was terrible noise in the middle of the street, and there was a lot of bikers doing tricks and going around and making a lot of noise and driving in circles.
Mm-hmm.
And I get outside to see what was going on, and there was a casket, a coffin, in the middle of the circle. There was a barely naked lady dancing over the coffin, some reggaeton music, in quite a dirty way,
Mm-hmm.
while these bikers were doing tricks around, and there were also fireworks and stuff, and that makes me wonder. So I couldn't believe those were
Mm-hmm.
actually Ecuadorians too,
Mm-hmm.
because none of us in the Sierra, in the Andean region, we pay our farewells that way.
Mm-hmm.
It was astonishing, really. So incredible performance of a goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we cope with these cultural differences in this context?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially regarding immigration, because in a way, we're all immigrants somehow. Yeah? Unless you're some of those 30 generations families that are always staying in the same place. Uh, hard, hardly to acknowledge, really, but we're all in this situation of immigration, and
Mm-hmm.
we need to perform according to context. So how we can prepare actually for that, because it's actually shocking. You start to feel completely out of place. This should be, I don't know, it should be something like these common things, because mourning and grief is something that is common,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow these interactions in cultural differences and cultural contexts that differ one from another may make you feel like this out of place situation. Like what I'm doing here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But there are two ways that I have seen people sort of manage this. Um, and I think because I used to live in the US with my family there, and now I live here in Canada by myself. I think something that I have generally seen two options, let's say, in terms of finding yourself in a different culture. On one hand, there is, I mean, this is not politically charged word, but I mean it in a very literal way. Like, I mean, like assimilation means taking the culture or wherever you are now. Whether I think, this is nothing new. Like we have this saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I think that's one option that some people take. I think another option is to try to find or join or create a little cultural enclave. So if you think of like Chinatown here in downtown Calgary, or if you think of there was the Ecuadorian neighborhood where I lived in New Jersey, right, or the Ecuadorian county, I think it was, or the sort of insular communities within the greater community, right, which are still part of the greater community, but if you get people for a traditional Ecuadorian funeral, you probably can find them in the traditional Ecuadorian community in New Jersey, for example. That's what I mean. And obviously, most people fall somewhere in the middle between these two sort of poles. Um, I think the sort of key, regardless of which path you take, because obviously both have problems, right? Like, if I take the path of joining an enclave, a cultural enclave, this can lead to isolation. This is something that I saw very closely in my grandmother, for example, who has lived in the US for almost 30 years now, but she doesn't still speak English like fluently to have a conversation in English. Which means that the only interaction she has and has had in 30 years is with the relatively small compared to the rest of the population Latino community in New Jersey. So she has never gone by herself to a museum in New York because the museums are English. She couldn't go by herself to try a new restaurant that she wants to try because she cannot order the menu and communicate with the waiter. So she effectively lives in a bubble where she can only go to places where they speak Spanish. So that is kind of the extreme of that cultural insularity. She didn't abandon anything, but that means she lives effectively in an island. To me, that's pretty sad. To me, it was, I honestly felt pretty sad for her that she couldn't, because it is limiting. It feels trapping. Like she couldn't do anything by herself because she couldn't go by herself. She couldn't communicate. And she's a very social person, so it was pretty tough. So, that's kind of one extreme. The other extreme is, also just simply giving up all of your cultural heritage and then taking part in rituals that don't really make sense to you. So if you want to have a lady dancing reggaeton on top of a coffin, and you go to a Catholic ritual here in Canada, that is probably not going to help you. Because this experience does not make sense to you. This experience does not give you the clothing, the meaning, the symbols we talked about last week, the symbols that make sense to you. You want a lady dancing reggaeton, not this priest telling me about all my sins. To me, that is something to celebrate, not something to be sad about and feel guilty about. So that's kind of the other extreme, right? Like, it's also got real to think that you can just give up all your cultural characteristics and merge into another culture. That's not realistic either, right? Like, so that is kind of the idea here. And the secret, I think, or the top tip here is look beyond the actual ritual. So, okay, so they are doing this, like dancing on top of a coffin. Why? Oh, because death is a celebration of the renewal of life, where life starts again. They are now free of suffering of being immortal. So we celebrate. That doesn't make sense to me. Oh, okay, so it doesn't make sense for me to take part of this ritual. Oh, okay, so let me look for another one. Maybe this is a completely different ritual to what I'm used to, but the meaning is the same. This is a sober, quiet celebration where we feel guilty about other things and we give our final farewells to our dearly departed ones. So now this is a Hindu temple, fine. It makes sense to me. I understand why they are doing this. I like it. This will help me. Even if it is completely different. So the idea is take a step back. Don't look at the visual practical component. Look at the meaning of the ritual. And see if that meaning makes sense to you. So I live here in Calgary, right? The Mennonite church, very different rituals to the United Church downtown. Even if they were to look the same, the meaning is different. Because they have different liturgical beliefs or whatever. Right? So that is kind of the idea. So if you find yourself in a context that is not yours, try to see beyond the obvious visual element, right? Try to see beyond the lady dancing reggaeton. Look below. Like, same thing with my grandmother, right? Like, try to see below, like, what am I getting from this? Try to see beyond the Spanish. Oh, it is the community. Oh, it is the friendship. Oh, it is the not feeling alone. That's what I'm getting from this. Oh, okay. So that makes sense to me. So that would be the recommendation there. Like, because, like you said very well earlier, like, if you go backing up, you get back to the common feeling of humanity. So if you go backing up, okay, dancing on reggaeton, death, the cycle of life and death. Why? Because we are sad that somebody died. So we have to put this in some way. And the way we deal with this is by understanding that death is part of the cycle, so we celebrate. And that is the role of the ritual. To make this idea real and evident for everybody who participates in the ritual. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you'll get it. So different kind of celebrations. Maybe not mine, but celebration.
Anyways, and the meaning. Right? Because if the meaning doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't matter if the celebration is exactly the same, it's not going to work for you. So it's really the meaning that matters. Like, what the celebration means to these people, and if that makes sense to me. If it doesn't, then you need to look for a different celebration.
Make your own.
Or make your own.
Be creative.
Exactly. I think that is sort of, that is literally how that works, right? Like, people find that, okay, this ritual, this idea don't make sense to me. Let me see if my idea makes sense to somebody else. And if you find at least one other person, boom, you have a religion. That's it.
Very well. So, since we're here so far, let me give you some frequently asked questions from the web about this topic.
Okay.
And let's see what happens, because questions here were quite weird.
Okay.
The first one is, am I normal?
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna take a step back for this question and say it is normal for all people at some point in their life to ask themselves if they are normal. That is part of being part of culture. If you are repeatedly throughout your life asking yourself if you are normal, that may be a hint that maybe you are not in the 66% majority of the population in one or other aspects of yourself. That is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, the majority is literally only 2/3. Like, there's one whole third of the population that does not fall in that. So, not being normal isn't that uncommon if you think about it. But that's what I would say. Normal people don't ask themselves if they are normal repeatedly throughout their life in different contexts. But asking yourself once or twice, that's normal. Nothing really changes. The answer to this question doesn't really change for the way you relate to the world, but it may help you find better resources or the actual help that you need. If you are not normal and you are trying to access services that are meant for normal people, they are not going to be as effective with you. So that's really the only advantage of asking yourself this question. Now, if you know, okay, so I know that I don't learn well in traditional normal education. So when I want to learn something, I learn by myself. I have learned to self-teach. So that's what I need. So keep that in mind. So there is nothing wrong with not being normal, but it is important for you to know so that you can take care of yourself better, like we were saying last time.
Very good. So now, the question is, how long will this grief last? I think we already answered this somehow. But
Yeah.
anyway, how long will it last?
Yeah, so there is no like universal answer. Like I said, it very much depends on you as a person. It very much depends on what was lost. And that doesn't mean that a person is like you were saying yourself, right? Like sometimes a pet can be weigh more on us than a human. Sometimes the loss of an object can weigh on us more than the loss of a pet. So that's different from person to person. Generally speaking, I'd say if after 6 to 12 weeks there has been no change in your feelings for grief, or they have gotten worse, I'd say that's where you need to go to therapy, right? Like, remember what I said earlier. There is no timeline, but ideally there should be a trend upward. During the first few weeks, okay, sure, there may be like more going down. If we're getting to like a month to like 6 weeks, and like I said before, 12 weeks would be like, okay, that's a lot. We probably need to start looking at talking to somebody, to a professional, because that means this grief is not moving in the way that would be healthy for it to move. But again, this is not a fault of you or anybody around that context. Sometimes it just happens, right? I am a very depressive person. Grief takes a lot of effort for me to go through. So I know that I should probably go to therapy if I have a lot. Again, knowing yourself, very important to be able to take care of yourself. If I were to lie to myself and say, no, I'm normal, I don't need to, I wouldn't look for help, the help that I actually need. So important to keep that in mind as well. No timeline, but you do need to keep an eye on yourself. Am I actually feeling better? If the answer is no, okay, has it been more than a month that I don't feel better at all? Okay, time to start thinking of maybe I do need to look for help.
Okay, so take care of your timing, because it could become dangerous, right?
Yes. Very important element here. The danger of grief is that if the loss becomes internalized, it turns into depression. That's I just summarized Freud's grief and melancholy in a sentence, but that's the issue. If I lose somebody I love, and I think there is nothing left in my life because that person was everything for me, I have internalized that emptiness. There is nothing left for me because that person died. Now this can turn into depression. This can put my life at risk. So, again, another thing to keep in mind as well there.
Good. Now, okay, so this is like textbook information, but
Yes.
what are the stages of grief, and do they happen in order?
Okay.
And I do want to hear this because first I read it, there were four.
Mm-hmm.
Now a female author added one more, and now
Mm-hmm.
another male author added one more, so six.
Mm-hmm.
So how many are there?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go back to the idea that we were talking last session of psychology is descriptive, not prescriptive. So these authors have found that for some people, generally speaking, grief will follow this sequence of steps. However, it's important to remember that this is an academic perspective. This is a way that we organize the world so that we can understand it, to learn about it and explain it to others. Grief won't always have the stages that these authors have described, and they won't always be in the order that these authors have described. The more culturally different somebody is to these authors, the less likely it is that what they describe will apply. So it's important to keep that in mind when we hear these things in psychology. Again, we tend to present this as universal. These 5, 6, whatever stages of grief. This is marketing. This is because it's easier to just say it like that than to have an hour of explanation as to why this is not the case. But it's important to remember that no, like these are not, again, this is not the law of gravity. We did not discover a primordial principle of the cosmos and describe it. No. We noticed that a lot of people kind of sort of do the same most of the time. So we organize that information into this idea. That the stage, that grief generally has these 5 stages. That I actually don't know off the top of my head, but I can tell you if you give me a second. I'm just gonna ask Google. This is the Kubler-Ross model. And so this is the guy that, again, looks at the world or looks at different group of people and sort of abstracts these recipe for what happened. Number 1 is denial. I mean, obviously, I'm a therapist, so by the time people come to me, they have already accepted that there was grief. So I honestly haven't seen a lot of denial except in really, really extreme cases, right? Like where the person is very sensitive to life in general. So there will be these. Now, I wouldn't describe this as a stage of grief. I would describe this as a portion of the unconscious where there is a denial, where somebody passed away and they are like, oh yeah, how are they doing? No, they passed away. Oh, okay, but are they going to get better? No, they passed away. So I have only seen it in that extreme case, right? As a form of defense mechanism, but in theory that's the first stage, where you lose something and you deny that you lost it. Like I said, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Notice how it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Thing number 2 is anger. We have talked about before how anger is a defense mechanism. So whenever there is an emotion, an event, or a thought that overwhelms our ability to sort of deal with it, anger is sort of the last line of defense. So before you are traumatized, anger is that last sort of guardian. So if anger doesn't work, you get traumatized. So usually when there is an extreme situation like that, anger will be one of the components. Bargaining is the third element. Again, I don't really, I haven't seen this a lot. Like this idea that you try to deny the loss. I mean, I don't know how you would do this with death, but I guess you have student loans like me. I guess I would bargain my student loans to see if I can get rid of them. Like I don't know. You can tell I'm not a big fan of this sort of theory, but like bargaining is the third step, where there is this attempt to somehow negotiate the loss to try and not lose it. Like again, to me, this doesn't make sense. You are already in grief. But that's number three. Number four is depression. In theory, this is where I would say grief actually starts, where the loss of the object becomes evident. It becomes evident to the ego, to the thing that speaks, and the actual process of grief, I would say, begins. This is where there is a sadness, there is something a physical component of feeling sad, or literally physically feeling sad. This is where emotions of hopelessness appear, emotions of wanting to die appear. This, like I said before, where one has to be careful not to internalize that loss. Life goes on. There are other things that matter. That thing that you lost. It wasn't you. It was just something that you had that you related to. But depression, and finally acceptance, where in theory, again, I'm not a big fan of this, but in theory, you accept the loss and move on. I admire the people who are genuinely capable of accepting the loss and moving on. I would say this is a very idealistic idea of how grief is supposed to work. I don't think acceptance is a necessary part of love. I mean, of grief. I think that you can choose to accept sort of the sadness as a way of dealing with the loss. There are people who will get sad and cry and go to the graveyard every year because they are still sad about the loss. Right? Like, there are people who will do a ritual every year to sort of represent that loss. Right? So, this idea that you just accept it and move on and it disappears from your life, again, that sounds to me like something that your boss wants you to know so that you can go back to work quickly. I do not think this is how it works for most people in real life. I think in many ways, acceptance, I wouldn't say acceptance, I would simply say peace. You get to a point where you are at peace with this love. And yes, that can be accepting the love. That can also be getting to a place where this is part of your life and you can continue without this affecting you in any other way. If I am getting depressed the whole month and I lose my job every year because of this loss, okay, wait. We don't have to work on that grief. But like I said, the idea that this has to disappear, that doesn't make sense to me. I think that for a lot of people, keeping something there is part of representing how meaningful that relationship, that object, that people, that pet was. And it becomes part of who they are as they move along. So those are the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Like I said, they are not the Bible, so I wouldn't take them to their word. But it can be useful to, like we always say, to understand what is going on with you. So maybe to you, in your process of grief, you see these 5 and say, you know what, yeah, that makes sense. I think I am here. I am going to try to move on to the next one. But don't suffer if they don't fit your experience of life. They are not. Like I said, is one author, one scientist who, from their client, is proposing this idea. Consider there's a cultural bias, consider there may be a gender bias, consider there may be a socioeconomic bias, right? Like therapy is expensive. Not everybody can go to therapy. So if this guy is talking about the people he met in therapy, he's talking about people who are well off. So if you are poor, maybe your grief doesn't look like this. So again, important to consider all of these things. These are not absolute truths. These are ways to describe what happens in some people. Right?
Well, and nice to get it. And I get one last question here from internet. That actually seems to answer itself. So it says, when should I seek professional help? What if I feel stuck?
That is when you need professional help. That is when you need professional. Yep, that is the answer. I would say this goes in general for all of psychology. There are two parameters that you use to know if you need to talk to a professional: intensity and frequency. And this applies to anything. Anything that you do too often or with too much intensity is problematic. So if you like dieting, if you're dieting too much, you start putting at risk your life. So that's problematic. If you are naturally a depressive person, maybe you don't get too depressed, but you are depressed all the time. That is probably something that needs to be worked on. You will probably be better off if you talk to somebody about that. So these two criteria are good. Like anything can be problematic if it meets one of these two criteria. If it is either too intense or too frequent. If I drink once a month, no problem. If I drink every day, I have a problem. If I drink once a month but I get blackout wasted and I wake up good in the street every month, that is a problem. So frequency or intensity can be a problem.
Good, 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 good. I got this one from all of this. It's kind of a personal one.
Mm.
But what comes after death or loss for those who live on?
I think the greatest challenge is facing death. I think we go through our lives trying not to think about that, trying not to remember the fragility of our life. But when there is an important loss, like somebody dies, I think that faces us with that reality. Like at that moment, we cannot escape anymore. We have to recognize that that one in the coffin, not going to be me one day. And I think that is the greatest challenge to those who stay. Because, like I said, even if you deal with grief, you have a good way to deal with it. This question is a personal one. This question of what death means to me is a personal one, right? Like, um, I can say something like about myself here. Like, I know, for example, that one of the choices I made in this term is that I want to live my life in a way that if I were to die tomorrow, I would be like, okay, now last day, I'm okay with it. And that means that I have quit a lot of jobs, I have gotten a lot of trouble, but that's because that's what makes sense to me, right? Like to me, it doesn't make sense to live as if I were to live forever, because that just doesn't feel like something real to me. So I try to live my life in a way that I can, sort of every day, to me can be the last one, and I'd be okay with it. No, I don't always get to that point, but I try. But I think that's that's a very personal way that I have organized my relationship with them. And I think that's what needs to happen to everybody at some point, right? Like some people choose to ignore it completely. That's fine. That's a valid way to do it. Some people will take shelter in spirituality, like we said before, right? Like again, going back to my grandmother, right? Like for her, every question about death, the answer was God. I don't need to worry about that because God takes care of that. And that's valid. I mean, she was happier than me. it worked, right? So I think that's kind of the idea there. For the people who remain, I think in many ways, what remains is the challenge. The challenge of answering what life and death means to those that remain. Not only navigating the grief, but also thinking about what will happen when I am not here anymore. Um, and I think this is where this more cliche idea of, okay, so kind of the next step from there is find the things about life that make it worth living, right? Like I said before, right? Like the idea is that if you are aware that about the fragility of life and all of those things that this needs us, then the opposite of that is enjoy life. Like, yeah, there's nothing you can do about that. Like, literally nothing. So don't think that much about that. Don't ignore it either. Like, take care of yourself. But enjoy life. But look at the things of life that in many ways would make you suffer if you died, if that makes sense, right? Like, look at the things in life that make you say, damn, I hope I don't die tomorrow because I want to do this, or I want to see this, or this is something that I'm looking forward in the future. And that's kind of the recommendation there, right? Like, the opposite of thinking about your death is thinking about your life. But genuinely thinking about your life. You know, thinking about your life not in terms of, okay, I want to have a mansion and a car and $1 million. No. Think about your life in terms of when I meet my deathbed, what story am I going to tell my loved ones that I'm going to be proud of? So what is that story going to be? That as I'm dying, I'm going to be like so proud of telling all my family that this is something I did. And like I said before, to me, that was never, oh, I was such a great employee at this nonprofit that I worked. Never. That doesn't make sense to me. So I say that is sort of what remains. Sort of finding the things in life that makes it so that you don't want to die. If that makes sense. Now that's kind of the opposite of working through grief. Hmm?
Oh, thank you, Josh. Let's try to keep up for the challenge. Now, I think it's your turn to find out how to pass the valley of shadows, grief, sorrow. But if you can't, then maybe it's a good time to contact the Healers Guild.
Yes. Or therapy, and it's therapy a lot today, so therapy also okay. But now, yeah. Likewise, enjoy like you said. You know, I think this is a very complex topic. There's a lot to say from many perspectives. Hopefully, we were able to share some of them today. As always, thank you everybody for being here, for listening to this. Please don't forget to follow us if you like what we do. Follow us on YouTube or social media. You can find us at the Healers Guild. This is MindQuest and the Healers Guild. And the Healers Guild. And as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.
Until next time.
Bye bye.